Joy.
All righty, we're good.
Okay, so yeah, you've read the brief, but we're in the Verde River watershed and looking at the future of farming. And so where I started was seeing that currently we live in an anthropocentric society and are disconnected from the processes that sustain us. And to mitigate the threats and to have a possibility of happy and healthy societies, we need to reconnect and become an ecocentric society. And to do that, we need to turn to our local ecosystems. And so radical localism is kind of the umbrella term for this, and what I'm defining as a reconnection to and integration of the local environment as a means of creating resiliency and economic development. So I looked at a number of local fixtures and used them as stand-ins for the local environment and how that can be used to create a culture of localism that will create resiliency in the town and also bring economic development and tourism in a healthy way, as well as integrating the local ecosystem into the built environment. So by looking at native plants, we're learning how to grow them, how to use them in cooking, which is because they're not typically what we find in a grocery store. But we're also bringing in tourists because it'll become a food destination because it has a different cuisine than most places, while bringing in local animals into the built environment as the plants that they are used to are in the city or in the town now. Similarly, the local trees can be used to make crafts, or the craft scene can be developed around the local trees. People learn how to grow them, and it becomes part of an aesthetic identity that can help, yes, brand, as much as I don't want to use that word, the town. And then looking at the Tuzagut monument, which was from the Native American Sinagua people that lived there a long time ago, and who did use a lot of these methods, and that's what they did. They lived off the local ecosystem. So we can turn and learn from them. And one of the things we can learn is that despite all the land they had, they lived in close communities and in those in their built environment. It wasn't all dwelling. There were cultural and social spaces. And so by taking these things, the residents of Cottonwood can become citizen farmers, not because they have to farm, but because culture is being brought up around it of resiliency. And so people can live, you can be a teacher, you can be a CPA or whatever, but also take part in the farming lifestyle that is happening there. And so my proposal is that we start to build these, start to densify and give space to these social and cultural spaces that develop this local ecosystem or local culture in which people are gardening, they're building things on their own, they're learning how to use the things that are around them. And so looking now, I've highlighted in green the spaces that are primarily currently greened out, and then also pointed out the 4 locations that Cottonwood has similarly chosen as focus areas for development. And I think that the future of it could look more like this, in which we're densifying around those points and other points that seem applicable, while allowing a lot of the more open space that used to be taken by sprawl to be reclaimed and used for farming, developing this sort of you know, the city that's in, or a town that's in between the both. It's still rural, but it's tightly connected in its social and cultural activities, which are absolutely linked to the open space of farming.
So these four, can I ask a couple of questions while we're on this image?
Yeah, this is actually my last one, so we're good.
Okay, so these four locations, they're selected by the city or they're selected by you?
Selected by the city.
Okay, and they're selected specifically for this type of urban farming landscape or just general development?
General development.
Okay.
And so I'm kind of appropriating them, if you will.
Okay, and why do you think they've selected these particular locations?
So the one on the top, that's Old Town Cottonwood.
Right.
I think that primarily they've been chosen because of the transportation network.
Uh-huh.
A lot of main streets are headed through those spaces.
Okay.
And I think that's fine. So, yeah.
Okay. Just curious. I was curious about those because they also look like they're fairly, not directly linked, but fairly closely linked to the kind of movement of the landscape, which also looks like it's the movement of the water around the town, right? So if you go back to the previous green spaces, the greener part of it is all connected to where the water would flow around the town, which is interesting. Okay. And each one of these seems to have a kind of street connection directly to that green loop that moves around the east and north. Well, it kind of really loops the whole town.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's something that I like about these 4 points that kind of seems a little bit serendipitous, is that there's all of them have a close connection to space that can be, even right now, easily transitioned to more natural space. And so it'll just reinforce that connection of, we have a more dense area, but then in a 5-minute walk or a 15-minute walk, whatever, you're right there. And so I guess the big question that I had going into this midterm was how to use architecture to talk about the systems at play. In that this is, it's more than just a building. I'm trying to look at the whole cultural reformation and how architecture plays a role in that. And so that's, I guess, do I stay kind of zoomed out and look at it at an urban scale level? Do I zoom in and really look at how a building can work to describe this culture?
I think you need to do both. And, kind of, for me, a little light bulb went off when, if you go back to the slide that shows the monument, the Suzuki Monument, okay, this one. Let me get my little arrow going here so you can see where I'm at. So I'm looking at this one down here. Right. And so you're talking about ecosystems and this one too, that both of them, and how you kind of live in an ecological way in this landscape, in this urban scape, right? So it's a little more complex now than it was back when these structures were built, simply because we've changed a lot of things, and we've built roads, and we've built infrastructures, and we've done a lot of things that really aren't connecting directly to, let's say, the flow of the topography, which is also the flow of the water, which also affects the growth of the plants, right? So back when these things were built, there was more of an immediate connection to the shape of the ground and the movement of the water and the movement of the sun. And I find it very interesting that part of that shaping of the ground, when they start building something, creates and these things are not easy to draw with, creates this kind of system, right? You can see it, that is a series of, looks like they're shifted square shapes or polygon shapes. They're not exactly the same. It's not, very tightly organized as a system, but they're really closely related, and it's creating this this grid pattern that is flexible and can lay across the landscape without having to cut it and terrace it, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's something embedded in this, right, that could give you a kind of clue to make your own system. Like right now, when I look at all of this, I feel like you're trying to do too many things all at once. And maybe a lot of these, you need to give it a little bit of an order, right? So maybe something about, integrating cooking classes and restaurants and making local furniture. And a lot of these are sort of side things that can be applied to a system. But the first move, I think, is a system to directly connect to the ecology of the ground. And I think that it is probably embedded in why they shaped these things like this. Okay, so for sure, they built it out of stone because the stone was there, right? And they didn't have to bring in, one of the things about ancient cultures is that they used the materials that they could pick up right on the site, which means they weren't shipping things, they weren't moving things, they weren't cutting things down, they were just stacking what was there. So maybe that's the first system rule that you make for yourself. Everything has to be of the site, right? So maybe you go back to stacking block, or maybe you build brick out of the dirt, or maybe rammed earth is probably not going to work up here because it's too moist. But you get what I'm saying, that first thing is not to import in a bunch of material. The second thing is to break it up into small enough modular units that it follows the formation of the ground without having to cut it and move away a lot of the land, right? And the way that we build now, like the building that you showed, which is rectilinear and double height and very part of the kind of off-the-shelf building system, I want to say, that requires changing the site a great deal, right? If the site isn't flat, or if the site isn't going to accept the shape of that box, then you have to change the site. So what this is they change the system of the unit, of the module, to form itself to the site. And that's what I'm suggesting, is that you look at how you start to work with a series of walls or of modular pieces that actually can be adapted to the specific topography and location that it's placed in. So you can, in a way, work generically. Like this is a kind of generic system that then gets applied specifically to a location. And I would find out why that shape, why it's connected the way that it is. It looks like they hold different types of programs. One's a courtyard, one's a dwelling. Is there one that holds feed or grain? I'm sorry, go ahead, Jacob.
Sorry, I was just saying those labels I just put in, they did have such things in their dwellings, but I just threw those in as examples.
I'd get more, I would do some research on the monument. The monument's fairly well known, and I'm sure that there's been an archaeological excavation and an archaeological document that could tell you what every single space is and when it was built and what it was used for, why they built it the way that they built it, how thick and deep the walls are. I mean, I would get into, you could choose which piece, but for me, this is the strongest one. I would really get into why is this structure in this shape, in this material, at this dimension and scale? Why are the different spaces connected the way that they are? My guess is that it's incredibly strong structure because of the way that the walls intersect.
Mm.
Um, my guess is that it has something to do with the flow of the topography. My guess is somehow it contains the water somewhere, right? That the water probably flows into one of these. Maybe it filters it in some way.
Mm.
Um, and then when you know what those things are, you can just itemize it out. Okay, I want something that gathers the water, that works with the shape of the ground, that is modular, that could be built over time. For sure, this wasn't built all at once, right? This is built over generations. So that's part of understanding the ecosystem. Like, do you come in with bulldozers and do the whole thing at once? Or do you do it piece by piece as it's needed and as the community grows, right? The second one is obviously the answer. That's the one that's more ecological. So think it through that way, like think it through the process of transforming, but in this at the same time supporting the actual place. My guess is that this also keeps the soil in place in some way, right? So if there's farming going up in this area, one of the things that you need to do is keep the topsoil in place so that when it rains really hard, right? One of the hardest things about farming on a sloped site is that when it rains, the topsoil, which is the most nutritious part, flows away with the water, right? So a lot of these kind of original farm walls is about stopping that or slowing down the flow of the water so it doesn't erase the top soil of the ground, so that things will grow and regrow and come back every year and things like that. So just a little, like, just get into one or two, not all, but one or two of the actual real technical aspects of, and I'd say one location to start with. Just pick one location, get into the technical aspects of that, develop a module, and then it could be something that could be applied to the entire area, because within a small region, it's not going to change that much.
And then, so two things. You were talking about building with what's there, and also you talked about how you've changed drastically since that monument was built. And so does what is there come into play in this, in the new constructions, the old homes or buildings go into the new sort of construction?
I would recommend working forward from where we are now. Right? It's also not very ecological to start removing things that are already contributing to the community. So, I mean, I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, what is this shape that keeps getting repeated to build that? What are all the things that shape is doing? So just by looking at it, I can see that it's flexible enough to adjust to the topography, so that when I want to build a space, I'm not cutting in the ground, but I'm building on top of it in such a way that the project can kind of shape itself with the site. So that might be a kind of rule or constraint that you put on yourself, that you say, okay, I'm going to do something that is more like a mesh that can be laid over the ground rather than a cut, right? What is the scale of each one of these? Okay, so you might need a different scale for a different type of farming now, but this was a scale that worked then. What's the scale that is, I don't know, but what's the scale that works for the kind of ecological farming that you want for going forward? That has something to do with what's the user too. So if you're thinking the user is members of the community, and they each have their own part of a community garden. So then is this enough gardening space for one family to grow everything that it might want in one season? So if it is, then what's that size? Like how much space do you need to grow, I don't know, whatever a family might want to grow, and what would they want to grow? And what could they possibly grow? And then that much space needs how much water? And then how do you make one of these devices something that can collect the amount of water that that much space needs to grow whatever it's growing? That's kind of how I'm thinking it through.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a different approach than say, okay, another way to think of ecological farming is to say that it's a community effort. Instead of individual by individual, 250 people come together and work one piece of land together and they do something really big. That would be another way to do this, but that doesn't appear to be what this is about. So
Yeah.
There's a lot of right ways to go about this is what I'm saying, but you want to choose one rather than everything you could think of.
Right.
Like if you really want to get into this project is going to be about making local furniture, then out of wood, then you need to figure out what are the trees that are going to grow the quickest? What are trees, what is a local type of wood that will grow really quickly so that we can use that wood and constantly be replanting to make furniture. So that's a different approach than, family gardens.
Yeah, and I'd say that's probably not the approach that I'm exactly going for necessarily. It's more, how can we just turn to the ecosystem in general, and use that to become more resilient and to
Yeah, I think the
really
problem with
grow.
that is that the understanding the ecosystem in general is not going to lead towards a specific design, right? It's going to lead towards saying, I want somebody else to figure out how to make this design work. I think it's more interesting if you figure it out, even if it's just one aspect of the ecosystem.
Right. Okay.
And there's something to be said too. If you can figure out how to do it with one aspect, the water, they're all interconnected, of course, but if you focus on one to develop a system, right? So you're introducing a new system into an already existing system, right? So your piece, your design is part of the ecosystem. It's not something separate from it. To think of it that way, like I'm introducing an ecosystem here. How does it work? Okay, there's an ecosystem to why that bird, buries into a tree. I don't know what it is, but birds don't do things haphazardly. Animals and birds do things with a reason. It's instinctual, right? It has to do with survival. There's something about the way that this bird needs to be in a habitat that makes them look or dig out or whatever, holes in trees. So it's kind of what is your instinctual, or what are the terms by which you want to insert your architecture, your system into this environment. And it can't be everything all at once. There's a big difference between saying I want to do it and figuring out how to do it. And to figure out how to do it, you really do have to get into some of the technical aspects of what it is you're trying to do.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Does anybody else want to? You guys do not need to just listen to me, please. And you know more about the project than I do, obviously. So help your colleague here and interject, add to my comments. Nope. All right, should we do the next one? And then maybe we can keep this in mind and we'll start bouncing back between them.
Good. Thank you so much.
If that's okay.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
All right, can you guys see my mirror board there?
Yes.
Cool. And I'll start the presentation.
Okay, great.
So as Jacob pointed out, this is the site. I'm just going to kind of walk through my thinking,
Okay.
and hopefully that will explain where I've gone and where I'm going. So anyway, here's the outline that we were given. This red line is the outline of the site, and then there's the Verde River. So a little bit of history. So I have family that lives on the site, and they've been cattle ranchers there for a while. But in my lifetime, the river has actually flooded twice. In 1983, there was a massive flood. So let me go. These are some flood maps. But
Wow.
these are the 100-year and 500-year floodplains. So in 1983, the 500-year floodplain actually was filled up. So my uncle lives here actually an inch out of the floodplain.
Wow.
And yeah, they said the river was a mile wide.
Wow. Did his property flood?
Yeah, so this is the lower pasture down here where they keep all the cattle. All that was flooded. It was a lake out their back door.
Wow.
Yeah, since it's a hill, the reason why the water flows around is because there's a hill right here.
So
Anyway.
that's kind of a bluff.
Yeah, it follows around.
Okay.
Anyway, so I actually interviewed my uncle last week, and we talked a lot about this floodplain, and it dictates where and how the residents here build. And so for many years, the residents have fought the government. There's been a lot of back and forth. Currently, if you live within the floodplain, you're paying $25,000 per year in flood insurance.
Wow.
So it's ridiculously high cost. So it's a big deal. So I decided to focus a little bit on that aspect of the site. So that I did some research into floodplains and the benefit of farming in floodplains. It's a really fertile ground, as you guys know, and the river actually has the potential to refertilize as it floods, as long as the ground is used in a good way, so the nutrients don't get washed away when it floods. So anyway, the floodplain designated where I placed my farms.
Mm-hmm.
So that created these three areas, 3 zones for dry infrastructure. So I kind of set apart an area where architecture could go. Then I looked at the zoning, the agricultural zoning in Cottonwood. So according to the zoning requirements, agricultural plots have to be a minimum of 5 acres. And then there's some other requirements as well. And so I took that piece of farmland that I had designated, and I broke it up into 34 plots of land. Initially, I wanted to see how those fit.
Mm-hmm.
But then I looked at the land and the way it was already laid out, and I decided that utilizing the boundary lines that were already there wouldn't be a bad idea. They're already 5-acre lots. So that's just a little bit of.
What's the difference between the brown, the light green, and the dark green in the existing situation?
So I'll go into that.
Okay.
Here in a second. So it's designating. It's not the current situation. I think that's my next slide. So the plan. So these 5-acre plots potentially could. The way I see it, they could become organic farms. So each plot of family could have their own farm. But it's not healthy to take a big chunk of land and cover it in one crop, as I'm sure you know. So, so the idea here, and I'll go into that now. So, is taking 3 different organic farming typologies. So I have a brown, a light green, and a dark green.
Okay.
And so you can see how those could potentially be laid out across the land to create diversity and yeah, creating more of a healthy environment. So designing each typology, there are these 9 criteria. They're kind of my values that I've decided to focus on. And obviously I can't go into great depth here, but so looking at like the overall lay of the land and each plot, designing it in such a way that it is healthy in these areas, if that makes sense. So I took these for one, the landscape, integrating wild areas. I'll just take that as an example. So you can see on the land, there's these areas that's actually where the trees were the most dense. And so I decided to take these areas and leave them as wild areas, and to let nature kind of go back. And so that actually in turn helps the farmland, brings back animals, the biodiversity. So anyway, that's one aspect. I won't go into all of those, but that's the idea.
Okay.
So getting into the architecture, let me clear my drawings here. So those 9 aspects that I talked about. So how are the farmers, these 34, 35 families that live here, how are they going to learn how to improve and farm in a healthy way? And so the idea I had was to create a research center that, go to the next slide here. So that can collaborate somehow, and I don't know how this will work, and I'm hoping this is where I really would like to focus, but a research center that collaborates with those that farm in the area. And so they can work together, research can be done, and the farmers can benefit, and then the farmers can bring knowledge they have and bring it to the research center, and so they can both benefit and grow together. Is the idea. So that's kind of where I stand. I think that's, yeah. There my drawing there. So yeah, I have some questions there. Just yeah. So what is this research center architecturally? What is it? How do the farmers and research center communicate and learn? What's the benefit to the farmers, the incentive to actually participate in this? How to get people excited and involved? Those are just some things I have on my mind right now. But I'll go back to
go back to this is a good one to stop at. Let me turn on my little thing again. So first off, I appreciate the kind of historical background and understanding this site from your kind of personal knowledge about it. I think that's a great way to start if you have an experience in a place, to start with your own experience, because there's just a lot of truth in that. Then I think the way that you have identified the floodplain and have correctly said, okay, within the floodplain is actually the best place to plant. because it is going to be the most nutritious because of the water that's going to come in and wash across it. If there's a way of holding it and keeping it to, seep down into the earth, that adds a lot of nutrition to the earth. So, I mean, historically, cultures have always built farmland, agriculture along water sources, and have always built them in such a way that the biggest amount of property that gets the most amount of water is where they're going to do the agriculture. It just makes sense, right? It makes everything easier. And then, when you add the fact that it's just going to naturally flood, this is the logical right place to locate the farms. So one question I have, this is how the property is currently divided.
Yeah.
Do you see a logic to that? I mean, I'm assuming there probably is one, but.
As far as I know, I haven't seen anything.
Okay.
I saw it as a kind of a way to inform the property. So
There usually is some kind, when you get to farmland, anything that has had agriculture on it in the past, there's usually an incredible logic because farmers are very, very pragmatic and it's a lot of work. So they usually do things in the easiest way. And when I look at this, what I see is there's here a series of, plots that are divided this way, which to me suggests, and you also said it, there's a bluff or a big hill right around here, that the water is running in that way if it rains down to this water source. Right? So the division of the land, and I'm guessing that all of this is sloping that way and the water's running this way so that it drops back down into here. Okay. And if you come around this way, you start to see that it's starting to orient in, okay, and somebody bought a big piece and it didn't quite work, but my guess is that everything is more flowing that way. Okay. So I would get the topo map and really see exactly how, probably the topography is following this edge. And so there's probably a topo line, a 10-foot topo line there and another one here. And I bet you anything it goes like this. Okay. So that gives a reason for the orientation of this like this. And maybe, when you're getting up here, that's the kind of the diagonal dividing line. So this side of the line, it goes more north-south, and this side, it goes more east-west.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So I would do something I think it's okay to keep the existing logic. You might improve it a little bit, okay? In the sense that, which way does the water flow? Is it flowing like this? So downriver is this way, I'm guessing.
Does anyone know
this is the Verde, right?
Yeah, downriver is the bottom of the page.
Yeah, okay, so downriver is definitely flowing this way, okay?
Yeah.
So if the water is flowing this way, and Cottonwood also gets very dry. So one aspect of this might be something that brings water up into a canal. So there might be a pump, this is how the water system works all across the Phoenix Valley. At the high point, we bring the water up and it goes into the canal system, and then the canal system drops the water when you need it across all the agriculture, which is now the urban part of the city, right? So there might be something where you add in a canal piece along the edge of the bluff. And the canal piece could do two possible things. One, bring the water in and disperse it across the farmland in dry times, okay? And then two, when this is flooding, that canal can be a kind of barrier to keep the upper part of the landscape from flooding, right? So if you said this is where all the farmland is, but you don't build in this part, you just grow, right? And that maybe there's a zone along here that all the actual construction is. So up on higher land where you're out of the floodplain, so you don't have to pay $25,000 a year in flood insurance, is where all the homes go and where
Yeah.
all of the research center goes, and, you know, the things like that.
Yeah, that sounds very logical.
Yeah.
I
And
think
it's just coming out of what they're doing anyway, you know, it's just like,
so. I know there is a canal, the Cottonwood Canal, that does something similar. It's somewhere in here.
doesn't surprise me. Yeah, actually, there looks like there's a little blue line coming around here. So, in making that maybe a visible part of the landscape, you know, one of the things that used to happen on the canals across Phoenix is that they were all earth cut, not covered in concrete, and they were all planted with big groupings of trees. So another thing you might look at is that the canal, the secondary, if this is the major canal line that's coming this way, the secondary canal lines that maybe feed 5 or 6 farm, you know, plots at a time, also are covered in some type of, you know, tree that grows well and brings in shade and creates a kind of barrier for the wind, or and breaks this up a little bit. So maybe there's a kind of, you know, way of breaking those into bigger plots of farm area along these canal lines. Right, so you might do that and then do these kind of tree things here. This thing is not so easy to work with. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And then another one like that, and then this, and then this. Another one down here. And then maybe these kind of bigger lines, if you look at the, you know, the old plans of Phoenix, along the original canal lines are where the first roads were built. Makes sense, right? Because they're digging out to make the canal, then they dump the earth, and then they pat down the earth, and then all of a sudden they've got a flat, smooth surface to drive on. So then that might also give you kind of a way of saying, okay, maybe the houses and the buildings are not along the bluff, but maybe they're at the extension of where the canal/roads might go. So maybe they're oriented along here, and then the next set is oriented here, and the next set is oriented there. Something like that.
Yeah, that kind of builds a framework on
Yep.
how that should be built.
Yeah.
Okay. Those are some helpful ideas.
Great start. I like it a lot.
I think for
Dave?
all of you, what Catherine just did was really important for you to remember. She was reading the land.
Yeah.
She was reading the land. In the United States, when you look at how land was subdivided, it wasn't subdivided based on watershed. There was no logic in reading the land. The logic had to do with the legal system. So it was gridded. And if you were to base it on watershed, there would only be 10% of the population west of the 100th parallel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So what Catherine just took you through is really, really essential that you all try to do that yourself. Okay. Because there probably is a mix between legal subdivisions and subdivisions based on how water actually moves and where it's best to build and where it's best to grow.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things that we said to everybody, you can unpack the legal rights so that you can begin to think 100 years out. This is probably the best way to conserve the use of this land for farming and what farming is going to be in the future, which essentially has to do with how do you use the water effectively and efficiently.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things to me that, you know, I did study a bit the water system of Phoenix when I first got here, and it was fascinating because Phoenix is this kind of combination of a legal system, right, which is just the gridding of the West, right? So, you know, we've got this north-south grid that goes absolutely everywhere, but the canals follow the topo line. Right. And you may not see them because some of them are underground now. They used to all be open, but the major ones are still open and they completely follow the topo line. And where the topo line hits the grid, they drop the water down. Right? So let's say this, you know, this is the river, it's the water source. Okay. But it's flowing downhill. So you would take the water from a certain point, create a canal that lets the water flow back to it. and then it follows this ordered legal system of the grid.
Awesome.
Cool.
That's really helpful. Thank you for.
No, I enjoyed it. I think you have a good start on the project. Well, I was wondering, what are the, there are a lot of buildings already, so already existing in the floodplain. So
Yeah.
you probably need to kind of have an idea about how to deal with those. Like, for
Yeah.
example, in the development of the modern development of Portland, the city of Portland did land swaps, right? So, Portland was this, okay? And it was sprawling like crazy around. And they basically said, and there was a lot of empty space in the middle of Portland, but it was kind of sprawling. And they basically said, all right, we want to have a green loop all around the city. So if you own a piece of property out here, we'll give you something of equal value within the boundary lines. They couldn't make anybody move, but they made this loop around the city, and they said, from this day forward, you can't build in this zone between the edge of the center of the city and their natural loop. If you already own something out there in what is now the new natural loop, you could sell it to the city and purchase, or you could trade for something that the city owned, something inside of the loop, and allow your property to go into conservatorism. So that's part of these big plans for the future too. Like, you can't change it overnight, but you can say, okay, from here forward, we are or we aren't going to build in this area. And if you already own something there, well, yeah, you've got the right to keep it there, but you give them an opportunity to trade it, right? Because they can't sell it for, right, what it would have been valued for before, because from this day forward, nobody can build anything there. So you want to think through that too, like what's already existing and how do you swap out, and how do you get everybody to agree to, basically move up here where they're out of the floodplain, and not disrupting and polluting the floodplain.
Yeah. Hey, that's great. I had thought about those homes, but yeah, that gives me some more logic to offer. So thank you. Okay. Maybe I'll hand it over to somebody else.
Yep. Get my little eraser out. Yeah.
Thank you.
I can go next.
Okay.
Just realized my computer is about to die. Did change my view to get this. Okay, can everyone see?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I just saw a 10-minute warning from
I
Max,
did
but
too.
I'll just let you know, if we don't get to everyone, I can be available later. Okay.
Okay, so for me, how I envisioned the future in technically less than 100 years, it's becoming more community based in terms of working together.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can almost think of how Amish farms work, how or communities work, where they have the farmland and everyone's specialized in their trade. And we, as as a society, are kind of becoming more and more specialized in what we do. Everything's becoming a lot more specific, and it's almost becoming like how trades were, where it was very specific on what people knew and what they did. So I see us moving kind of in that direction as well, but more passion oriented. So how I see this community becoming is surrounding hobbies, and a hobby as in that's something you're interested in and you're passionate about doing. So currently there are things that are called hobby farms. So these are usually smaller farms. The point of it,
For me, your screen is black. I'm assuming you're
it?
showing something, so we have a little
Yeah.
technical something here.
Maybe give it a second to load.
Okay.
We didn't see your first slide either.
Oh, you didn't?
Yeah, I haven't seen anything. It's been
Oh.
black the whole time.
Yeah, it looks like you're sharing something. It's just a black.
Oh, let me see. It's like telling me my sharing is paused, but it's
Mm.
not letting me unpause it.
Just do what
It's
I
not
what
letting
I
me-
generally do is just go out of share, like quit.
It's
Okay, now you're
can you
up.
see this now? Okay,
Yeah, now
it
you're up.
wasn't letting me use the full screen mode, so I guess I'll just have to do it with this.
Okay. Yeah, now I can see it.
Sorry, this is the original screen.
Okay, got it.
And so what values I'm kind of looking to maintain is this idea of building people's passions, working together as a community, but also preserving what natural environment we have.
Mm-hmm.
So going on to the farms as a hobby, like I said, there are currently people who do small farms. I feel like you think of, people that live in Texas and have this large plots of land and they'll have their livestock or sometimes like a small orchard. This is what people call hobby farming. Because it's not, the point of it is not to, bring income to your family or your household. It's just for your benefit. And sometimes people, they'll sell their crops if they have it. If you have an orchard, that's probably the best way to deal with all the crops that you get from it. So I see this as most of what the land is it is providing to the community, and that is a purpose to it, but it is also what whoever owns it, they're passionate about. It's not that they're being required to do it from an outside source. So these are just some ideas that I have of how that'll look like in the landscape. So continuing on the hobbies and a little more of what specialization, I see this almost as like a metaphorical farming of farming your own hobby and your own passion, or farming yourself. So it'll be throughout the land, closest to the city. So they're kind of an in-between spot between the farms and the original town. Farms will stay along the Verde River where it's most beneficial for them. And these will be an in-between that is just almost like studio spaces for it. So hobbies that are like painting, you want a large studio space for that. For things like woodworking, you may want a large outdoor space for tools and supplies. Metalworking will probably be one that is more contained, but also requires a large space. So that's kind of the purpose of these hobby locations, is when you have a hobby that's too big to contain in your own house, and you need that extra large space to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, things like farmers markets or community held events would be popular, weekly routine for these hobbyists and farmers to contribute to their community. Tying all of these together would be a type of learning center where people who are starting farming or starting their hobby and really want to dive into their passion can come and get supplies and learn how to do that, especially farming. So this is a sketch I did to see kind of what that would look like. I want this very natural and open kind of environment where these are just the classrooms or the buildings. There's not one huge structure, but more modular, smaller structures. And it's open to the land, so you can see actual examples of farming that are just smaller pieces of land for educational purposes. This one's a better example, and the very first slide I had is the best example of where everything is. But so coming up here is all the farmland and smaller houses for farming, where farmers would live if they wanted to live on their land. Like I said, the hobby studios would be kind of an in-between and closer to the town, but not totally on the river and on the best farmland. And the community center would be here in an easy access location for both. And the rest of the plans would be just left alone to go back to nature.
So the people that are using this, are they, I'm guessing that they're coming and going. They don't live here year round, do they?
They You don't have to. I see them as at least starting as people from the Cottonwood community that have their own passions and hobbies, or it could be people moving here from another place just for this purpose.
Mhm. And also, I mean, the way you're describing it, it kind of also feels like it might be a sort of vacation resort or working vacation type place. Like if I lived in New York City, this is the type of place I might want to go to for, I don't know, 3 weeks in the summer, just to get out of the city and be out in the openness and have my own studio and do whatever it is I'm passionate about for 3 weeks. And I rent it, it's kind of like a rental property, long-term rental property, or, at least a week at a time, something like that. I don't know, I'm trying to come up with a narrative that touches on all of the things that you're wanting to do, but also, I don't know, maybe it's a little bit more realistic in the sense that there's there's different ways of using it. Like if it really is that property is being farmed and they're growing things and they're raising farm animals or any of these things, that's a full-time job. And I know you're saying it's not a job in the sense that they're not making a living off of it. So then we're talking about, okay, people who have made a living off of something else and are maybe retired or very, very wealthy, or, how are they making their living if they're not making their living off of their full-time activity of farming? Because farming is a lot of work. So if that's not how you're imagining it, and you're really imagining it more as a hobby that you can work on for a few weeks at a time, then I think you're doing something that's more of like a resort, of like an ecological resort where people come, it's different people. Maybe somebody does own, maybe there are places that you can buy, but you rent them out to other people. But there are groundskeepers and there are people that are actually making their living upkeeping this place and taking care of the animals and making sure that the water irrigation happens on time and things like that. And then a whole number of people from across the country could come here and visit and participate. And, so I guess what I'm trying to say is, if it's one thing where it really is owned by the people that are there, then that are there more or less full-time taking care of it, then that's one type of development. But if it's something that is more of a engaging in nature and ecology for a few weeks a year, really more as a hobby and as a getaway from urban life, then that's a different type of development. And I think you could do one or the other.
Yeah.
Be really clear about how you're blending them together.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Because actually thinking through how's it really going to work, and how is it going to work, economically, in terms of how do you get all this off, who pays for all of this, and who are the users really. And I think if it's the hobby model, it's people from around the country much more than it is people that are in Cottonwood. If you're in Cottonwood, you kind of are already living in a rural town. You don't need to get away from the center of Cottonwood just a few miles over to the river. You could do that, for a visit for the day, but you're not like going to go away from your house that's 3 miles away, you know, for a few weeks. So I think it's a different scale at that point.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of
feeling that,
examples.
like, how do I blend these together now?
Yeah, and there are a lot of examples of these kind of ecological vacation locations. They're becoming quite popular as
Recording in progress. We're continuing. I hope you guys